You're looking at LA's MacArthur Park. It was one of the city's toniest neighborhoods in the early 20th century, but by the end of the century, it had become one of LA's seediest and most dangerous, a swap meet of open drug sales and frequent violence. And in the 21st century, it was the site of the most horrific of crimes, the shooting death of a 3-week-old baby at the hands of a gang member who accidentally killed that child when he botched the shooting of the street vendor he was supposed to murder. The story behind that notorious crime is a story of LA, of LA's gangs, and of a park that transformed from the home of LA's poshest residents to LA's poorest and most desperate residents, undocumented immigrants trying to survive in a new land. It's a story that only a seasoned LA journalist and expert on LA gangs could write with authority. And former LA Times gang writer Jesse Katz has done just that in his new book, The Rent Collectors: Exploitation, Murder, and Redemption in Immigrant L.A. And I am delighted to welcome my friend of more than 35 years, a mentor of mine going back to my days as a reporting intern at the Los Angeles Times, my hermano, Jesse Katz. Jesse, welcome to Frank Buckley Interviews.
It is so great to be with you and talk about this book, which I feel in a lot of ways is a story I've been preparing my whole life to write.
Yeah, you have. And before we get to the ugly crime itself, that's the sort of the centerpiece of this new book, let's set the scene that is MacArthur Park, once known as Westlake Park, for people who may not be familiar with a place that you lived in for a decade. It's in the shadows of the skyscrapers of downtown LA, but tell us what MacArthur Park is like today.
So I lived in a loft in what's called the American Cement Building, and I had floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out right on the park and the lake and the streets churning with commerce and onto gang turf, some very, precarious parts of the city. And, it's a really odd dichotomy because on one hand, it's beautiful. Yeah. I mean, there's this body of water and there's open space and as you mentioned, it was a civic asset for over 100 years. And yet it's now surrounded by one of the densest, most densely populated neighborhoods in Los Angeles, largely undocumented population. You have really desperate people living in deeply uncomfortable conditions who are, trying to invent their own survival, trying to figure out how to live in LA.
Yeah.
And we, as Angelinos, we benefit from their labor. A lot of the folks that live in that community are our restaurant workers and our valets and our landscapers. But, they have precarious lives and they're living in highly overcrowded conditions, and they're also vulnerable to a street gang that calls that area home.
And let's talk about that. In 2007, this horrific crime happens in MacArthur Park. 18-year-old Giovanni Macedo volunteers to murder a street vendor, Francisco Clemente, who isn't paying rent to the gang. And then the shooting takes a horrible turn. He doesn't kill Francisco. He kills a 3-week-old baby by accident. How did that happen, and why did it happen?
Well, let's keep in mind that most gang crime is pretty disorganized. The gang in the MacArthur Park area happens to be a highly organized, hierarchical gang with a real pecking order and a real economic motivation to control activity in that neighborhood. Keep in mind too, and I'm sure we'll talk about this, that the city of Los Angeles at that time outlawed street vending. So you have somebody selling stuff on the street trying to put bread on his table, but he's also vulnerable to the police, that are coming through and citing, fining, even arresting street vendors. And the gang they're smart, they're shrewd, and they see that vulnerability. They see the opportunity to take advantage of that. So they were charging rent to the street vendors. It's absurd, right? This is a patch of concrete that belongs to all of us, right? This is our city, and here's somebody who's turning that sidewalk into employment, and yet he's caught in the middle between the cops and the gangs. I have to beg to differ with you that Giovanni volunteered for this assignment. He was a young member of the gang. He was kind of the weak link at that time. He was naive. He wanted to belong. He called it respect. He wanted to be respected. But the better I've gotten to know Giovanni, the more I've understood what he really wanted was love. He wanted to be loved. And the gang recognized that vulnerability too. And so they put him up to this. He did not want to go kill a man, in the middle of a crowded street, but they put a gun in his hand. He didn't even know who he's supposed to kill. They put a gun in his hand and they said, "That's the guy, go do it." And he didn't have many good choices at that moment. What do you do if you back out? You might become a victim yourself at that moment. He goes through with it. Fortunately, the vendor survives, and I've also talked with him at great length. But yeah, one of the most horrible things imaginable takes place. One of these bullets accidentally somehow strikes this newborn infant in a stroller next to the vendor.
Yeah.
And Giovanni never saw the baby. He didn't even learn what he had done until a couple days later. And I don't know, I mean, he did something very reckless, and he didn't mean to take somebody's life, and that's a terrible thing to contemplate, but he didn't mean to kill the baby, and yet that triggered all these other kinds of consequences.
Because you actually start the book with Giovanni and his escape, as it were, from Southern California to Mexico at the hands of his elder gang members, and you start the book with the attempt for them to kill their own young gang member. Why did that happen?
So killing a baby, it makes us sick, but in the gang world where all sorts of, carnage is tolerated, it's almost like akin to a war crime, right? It's just a special atrocity and you can't do it. And the gang needed a scapegoat. They needed to get rid of Giovanni in order to be in good standing with the highest echelons of the gang world, the prison mafia that's overseeing all of this commerce out on the streets. And so they lured Giovanni. I mean, this is his level of naivete. He thinks they're gonna hide him out in Tijuana. And they lure him down there on that pretext. But it's really, they're setting him up for an execution. And in the middle of the night, after getting him drunk and taking him to the striptease bars, they load him in the car and they drive over this crazy mountain road on the way to Mexicali called La Rumerosa. And it's like another planet there. It's a Martian landscape. It's cinematic in a lot of ways. And I've been there, I've driven that road, and I've tried to see the spot where this crime took place. And his own homies looped a rope around his neck, strangled him until they heard something snap. And then they heaved him off the edge of this cliff and left him for dead. Drove back to LA, said, we took care of our problem, And Giovanni wakes up on the side of that cliff and he's alive, and his neck hurts a lot, but he hasn't suffered any internal damage, and he crawls out of this abyss up to the side of the road. And I have to tell you, I am obsessed with that moment. Like, what do you do now?
Yeah.
What would any of us do if we had just done the unforgivable? We've crossed this line that you can never come back from, and yet he's been discarded. The people who he did this for have now betrayed him and done away with him, and everyone assumes he's dead. You have a new start on your life in a way, but he's 18. And he's got no money, and he's got no phone, and they've taken his shoes, so he's standing there in his socks. And it's like, how do you solve the puzzle of your life, especially when you're a kid and you've just been disposed of? You've done the worst thing imaginable, and now the worst thing you could imagine has been done to you.
On that note, we are going to take a quick break, and we will be back with Jesse Katz. And this is MacArthur Park near downtown Los Angeles. It was the location of the horrific shooting death of a 3-week-old child in 2007 at the hands of a gang member who had intended to shoot a street vendor. It's chronicled in the new book, The Rent Collectors, Exploitation, Murder, and Redemption in Immigrant L.A. And I'm back with its author, Jesse Katz. You talk about the conditions that led up to the terrible killing of that child, the systemic failures, the policy choices made by elected leaders, the family breakdowns, the untreated traumas. There's a lot. Why did you decide to write about MacArthur Park, to use that to tell this broader story of LA?
Well, as I mentioned, I lived in MacArthur Park, so I was seeing those issues unfold right outside my window. The crime that Giovanni committed occurred about 6 blocks from my front door, so it felt very personal to me. I had a real stake in exploring that ecosystem. I also think these issues are, they're highly concentrated in MacArthur Park, but they're broader issues. They're about Los Angeles as a city. I think we could go beyond that. They're really a window into America and maybe some of the problems that are looming in the future for the rest of the country. And there's just so many layers to it. There was war in Central America that the U.S. government facilitated and encouraged. There was a broken immigration system that didn't allow people escaping that world a legitimate way into this country. There were these decisions by the city to outlaw street vending because it was considered, unruly or messy, a public nuisance, rather than looking at it as a capitalist endeavor, right? It was a sort of a civic amenity. And you have gangs that are filling that void. People who become powerful in the gang world don't do it just through brute force. A lot of them are highly intelligent. They're certainly charismatic. If you're going to get people to do things for you, and if you're going to get them to do bad things for you, you have to have a really keen sense of psychology, of how to manipulate people. And I guess I've been fascinated by that world really ever since I came to LA in the 1980s.
You started the process of reporting this book by reaching out to Giovanni and actually making contact with him in prison. I know you, I know you're a father, and knowing what he did it give you pause? And as you've developed your relationship with him, and I don't know if I would call it a friendship, or you can characterize it however you wish, how does that happen as a reporter and as a human being when you're sitting face to face with someone who is willing to pull out a gun and shoot and kill anyone that ended up killing a 3-week-old child?
So I have written about these themes for almost 40 years, starting as a cub reporter at the LA Times. I came from Portland, Oregon, in a very idyllic part of the Pacific Northwest. I was not familiar with this world at all, but as a newbie to Los Angeles 40 years ago, I guess I had the opportunity or the good fortune to be thrown in to the streets of LA. And so I've always been interested, kind of fascinated in the underworld. I mean, we all are to some level, right? It's why we watch shows like The Sopranos or The Wire, because you want to know, like, what is it really like? Yeah. How do these organizations work? But I've always wanted to go deeper than that, and I've always felt that if you can get beyond the label, if you can get beyond the stereotype or the category that we put people in, and we start to look at them as human beings, as individuals, we know their name, we know their face, and now we know their backstory, it just changes your point of view. It changes, I think, how you feel about somebody. And I guess I've always wanted to believe that people who are on the wrong path or who have made terrible choices are not, we don't write them off. I want to believe that there's always the capacity for change. Mm-hmm. And I've written stories about people who I thought were changing and they didn't. And I got burned on those stories, but I still wanted to believe. And, I wrote Giovanni a letter in 2018. I'd been thinking about him and his life for a number of years. And I hesitated to write to him because who knew? He had been in prison for 11 years by then. Was he broken? Was he hardened? Did he have anything to say to me? But I decided I was going to believe the opposite of that. And I said, I'm going to go out on a limb and say you're not the same person you were when you pulled that trigger at age 18.
I would also say that you present LAPD detectives as the complex people they are as well. They're simultaneously ruthless in their pursuit of justice and humane in how they treat the victim, in this case Francisco, the man the vendor who was shot. And Francisco couldn't believe it. He's an undocumented person, and as a result of becoming a victim, the police detectives realized they could help him to get his green card. And as you put it in your book, it continued to amaze Francisco that a representative of the same LAPD that had once shooed him from the streets of downtown's apparel district and into the clutches of MacArthur Park's rent collectors would invest so much care in him. Is that, do you go into the writing process with that in mind, that you have to present this full picture?